Okay, today is a continuation of things that have been spoken about in the past couple of chavuras, such as status of corporation, halacha, and it's also, they tell me that this year Shabbos HaGodol is Erev Pesach, and Mini Yisrael is when Shabbos HaGodol is and Erev Pesach, you say the Shabbos HaGodol drosha the week before. Yes. So this is the week of the Shabbos HaGodol drosha. So we'll talk about both of them together. But in the manner of the Yiddish speaker, who before he got up to speak said, before I talk, I'll say a few words. I also want to say a few words. Actually, I have a lot of words to say, but I'm not going to say them. So it's just a few words as a kind of an introduction. I heard years ago in the name of the Brisker Rosa from Barucha, they said Ben Torah can go into any profession he wants, except law. Why law? Because law teaches you to think lehepech b'das Torah. Their concepts are the reverse of the reverse of halacha. He was, but any other profession seemed not to have any particular objection. He was either 50% right and 50% wrong, or 100% right and 100% wrong. I'll talk about where he was right first. Where he was right is, and I'll try to explain why he was right and why the situation exists. If you look at the American legal system, there are many, many areas in which whatever principles are expressed in the system are quite antithetical to what you will get from Shas and Bleich. I don't have to give you too many. There are numerous. If you talk about something like proximate cause, the way we define proximate cause, or the way they define proximate cause, for much of which they define as proximate cause, for us no more than a groma. You've got to have virtually a supervening cause in order not to have proximate cause. There's a whole history of interpretation of the notion in the common law system. If you talk about something like respondent superior, that the master is responsible for the acts of his servant, we say in shliach levar could be a hepech and a hepech. If you talk about something like a will, it's interesting. Ramesh couldn't understand the common law system to the point where she thought that a will is a kinyan tumta. He didn't realize that a will causes property to pass achar misa, not before. So he thought, no, so will's like somebody once showed me there's one state in the Union in which it passes after misa, not before misa. And just as an aside, only because if anybody knows the source, please let me know. I once found in a book, a textbook on property. It was a woodcut that was reproduced, and I was just glancing at it. I saw it, and I went back afterwards, years afterwards, to try to find it. Where was it? I can't find it. But I found it very, very revealing. It had a picture of a coffin being taken out of a manor house and loaded onto a hearse. The hearse was a horse with a carriage behind it. And underneath was a kind of a caption saying that in the common law system, or words to that effect, it was assumed that the estate passes with the taking of the lord of the manor from the manor house into the hearse is taking him to the funeral. I took that when I saw it the first time. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that it might come to use some other time, that they also understood that you can't have something achamisa. So they had this interval between being dead and being put in the hearse. During that period, it could pass in one way or another. If anybody could find that woodcut for me, I would appreciate it very much.
I did see a Far Side cartoon where the piano in the library going straight up said, well, he is taking it with him.
Okay, it won't help me. And, it's something like products liability. For us, products liability can't be more than a kroma. And I won't even talk about bankruptcy, because bankruptcy is machlokes shnuya, to say the least. Only I will point out that the people who think that bankruptcy is recognized in halacha for more than is really in halacha is because of the fact that the Brisker was right. You come with a certain mind fix, and you want to put a square peg into a round hole. So the halakha and the American law system are more or less the same. Or goes that you get influenced one way or the other, and that's what he says. That if you buy it all, you can start thinking krum in terms of halacha also. The real danger is the danger of chauvinism. That's natural, I suppose, but Jews are, I think, more prone to it than other people. Anything good that they have, we had before them, and do you want better, we probably taught it to them in the first place. I don't remember the name of the author, but there is a book with the title Jewish Law in American Courts. It was published in the late 20s or early 30s by a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, in which he has chapter after chapter trying to show where common law, American law, where it all comes from halacha. Was he right? Was he wrong? I'm not terribly interested. There's another book that should be written, American law as misrepresented, Jewish law as misrepresented in American courts. I'll never write the article because I'll tell you around it. But if you look at the cases which cite American, it would take half an hour to give you examples. If you take all the cases in which they cite American law, they either get it wrong.
Jewish law.
I'm sorry, they cite Jewish law. Either they get it wrong or they misinterpret it, one or the other. So leave that aside. But and I'll even talk about corporations. Bialdusi, when I was maybe 13, 14, 15, I thought that corporations were tzibur. We had the concept of tzibur long before they had the concept of corporation. By the time I was 16 or 17 and learned a little bit of Mishnah and discovered that you have to make a birchas tzitzis on the tzitzis belongs to the kol, I realized that tzibur is not a corporation at all, that it's really shutfim. And it's got Larry Zek, but when I was growing up, I thought the corporations and tzibur were one and the same. It was krum. Medusa, but Mr. Rove was right. I came with a kind of a prejudice because I knew a little bit. You picked up from the newspapers, knew a little bit of American law. I could multiply the instances in many, many cases. The other part where the Riskarov was 1,000%, 100% wrong, or if you prefer, 50% wrong, if he was 100% wrong, 100% right, or 50% right, 100% wrong. What was wrong is he thought other professions are okay. There's no problem with other professions. There's not the profession per se, but the problem is that we grew up, or I grew up, I can't speak for anybody else. I can say that my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, are 6 generations in this country. They are not Americans. They grew up in Flatbush and in Lakewood. I'm only a 3rd generation American, but I am American to the core. And I have to do, sometimes I have to struggle to overcome it. They don't have to struggle to overcome it. To them, it's a double push it. And I could talk for another half an hour, giving you all the examples in which this is true. And that's because we live in a culture that has a totally different value system. I'll give you just one example, which is related to law, and it's probably taken out of context. There are better examples. But I think I said once upon a time when we were learning in Nazar that as a child, I was trying to teach myself Yiddish, and there was a magazine called the Yiddish Wort. And it came one month, monthly. It came with a story. The story I don't remember anymore, but it had a picture of a Reformed clergyman. And it described he was Mesader Kedushin, the second marriage for a woman who did not have the benefit of a get. And he wrote a tshuva. And he was holding the tshuva in the picture. And the tshuva said, I was able to read the script, that was Hebrew. Tami bedover dina the malchusa dina. Now I was, young enough, old enough to know that was behevel, but obviously. But the part of the American psyche is that dina the malchusa dina must be at least one of the Taryag mitzvahs. I'll give you one example taken out of context and not significant in and of itself, but I don't think it's a secret that in this country, Dina Malchusa Dina is regarded with utmost severity, And in European Jewish society, it was lehepech. I'm not saying they were right, I'm saying they were wrong. I'm not saying we're right, I'm saying we're wrong. But it's part of the culture in which we grew up. And the example of that is, I once, browsing the library, came upon a series of yearbooks published by Union of UHAC, of American Jewish Congregations, Union of Jewish Congregations of America.
Reform.
Not the Reform. The OU.
Oh, you.
Yeah. No, yeah. Union Orthodox Jewish Congregation, sorry. It was yearly, it was an annual. And it had the proceedings of the annual convention. Now they're biannual, I think they were annual then, whatever it was. And several issues, one after another, they were inveighing against these European rabbis who are mesader gittin without benefit of a prior civil divorce. And they thought that this was absolutely horrible. They were shein kamayu. It was never also, and later the legislature in New York had to rectify all this by passing a statute which said explicitly that it is not contrary to the law to have a religious divorce prior to a civil divorce. The only thing that's contrary to the law is to pass something else off as a valid divorce in the state of New York. And that was to be made sure upon all these people who were doing it anyway, not to make them criminals or whatever. But that was all because they were very concerned about this concept. It was one of the concepts they were concerned with. They were born and bred a European. I'm not saying he's right. The European would kind of laugh at the whole concept. But that's what we're living in, and it's important to know that there are different Weltanschauungen, and that ours is not necessarily, in fact, it's usually not identical with that of the American culture. And I can give you examples in every facet of life, but then we wouldn't get to what we really have to talk about. This is a kind of ideological assimilation that is taking place, and it affects you. And I can tell you that it's hard to overcome. Well, you have to know it's there in order to overcome it. But if you don't know it's there, you can't overcome it. It reminds me, and this is just a Dimion Bialma, there's a Teresh Yisrael that has a report. Where it comes from, I don't know, but it comes of a painter who painted a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the picture of Moshe Rabbeinu had him as a depraved, cruel, mean individual. That's what he looked like on the picture. And somebody showed it to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, "That's right, that's what I look like. That's what I am. I don't act that way. I don't behave that way. It's because I was gleifer on my tunis, but my basic tunis weren't the Moshe Rabbeinu tunis." Sorry?
That's a Yomtiv brings it.
Not the Teresh Yisrael.
Maybe.
It's okay, whatever. And the source, I know that the source is not known. I suspect that it's not a very reliable source. But the Musa Haskell is there. There are people who have tunis and nefesh, and they have to overcome tunis and nefesh. And I will not relate it to contemporary matters at all. But Hanev and Yovin. In any event, that's where we're starting from. So let me say that as a kind of a hakdama, and let me go now to the concept of a tzibur and Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, Shechal, the Shabbos particularly, the Shabbos, Godel Drosha, is good only for the years in which Erev Pesach occurs on Shabbos. I have three sources for the Chabur today. The first is in volume 1 of Bnetzivat Halakhic. It's printed there with things that we're not going to talk about. Anyway, in these are Shabbos Shuvah Rosh, you'll have the Drush there also. Shabbos HaKodel, I'm sorry. The second comes from the 8th volume of Contemporary Halakhic Problems in two separate places. One which talks about the natural law basis of the revealed law, or worse to that effect. And the other is in the Miscellaneous, dealing with a Hakdama to Masechta Bava Basra and the Vilna Shas. It was somebody written by a person, Moshe Levi Horowitz. I think he's listed as, or he's titled as the Abad of Pinsk, and it's there in context of historical controversy concerning the Vilna Shas, not the Slavita Vilna controversy. That was different. Partly somebody in Berlin was putting out a Shas to compete with the Vilna Shas, and people they were coming out volume by volume. People had already paid to make kedima, and they were supposed to be paying for every volume as it arose. And apparently the Berlin was much cheaper. And he's writing here what's called Effective Tshuva, which is made a preface to the Bava Basra. A lot of ones had already been printed, but this is when Bava Basra was printed in the middle of the controversy, explaining why you're mechuyev to pay the Demekin Kedim that you promised. And don't talk to me about the technicalities of halacha, but basically he says that it's a kind of an a priori concept that you made a contract and you have to abide by the contract. And in both of those cases, you'll see that there's a concept of a priori, what I call the natural law concept. And I'll come back to that when we get to our topic a little bit later, not the Shatz problem. But the other part that comes in the a priori basis of dogmatic law, or at least the Torah Shabbat. So let me start first with the Gemara dealing with Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbos. So we have a Gemara in Psochim Samach Vov, Toner Rabbanon. Halacha zu nis almo mibnei b'seiro. Ham achas avo osolius b'Shabbos come out Erev Pesach and Shabbos. Shok chuvela yodu in Pesach deiches Shabbos in loy. They didn't know they bring Korban Pesach on Shabbos. There are malachas involved, obviously. The shvit itself is a malachet. So they ask, Klub yesh odom yidea in Pesach deicha Shabbos eloi. Omer lahem, odom echad yesh olom mibovel v'hilel abav lishmai. Shishimesh negdili hadur shmayev avtalyan v'yidea in Pesach deicha Shabbos eloi. So he got Hillel, he got it from Shmai Vaftalion, and he's going to tell them, Shol Chuvakarloi, Omrloi, Kakash is this, what kind of shail is this? Klum, Ato Yidei and Pesach Teichs Shabbos in Loi, Omrlehem, V'chi Pesach Echod Yeshlona B'Shona Shedech Shabbos, Haloi Harba Yisr Mimasai Psochim Yeshlona. You have 200 Psochim L'Teichas Shabbos. Why shouldn't this one be Teichas Shabbos? Where are the 200 Psochim invented to Midim, which are every day, plus the Korban Musaf. Those are all Deichas Shabbos. Omerloi minayin l'cho. He said, how do you know this? Omerlahem nemar moed b'Pesach v'nemar moed b'Talmid. Ma moed omer b'Pesach Deichas Shabbos. Similarly, the moed omer b'Pesach is also Deichas Shabbos. If Talmid is Deichas Shabbos, then Pesach is Deichas Shabbos. It's Exer Shava, Exer Shava, Mayadei Mayadei. Then he has the second time. Void Kavachem Umatomich ein Elnish Korish Deichas Shabbos, Pesach Elnish Korish, and it didn't Deichas Shabbos. He's telling me if the Talmid is Deichas Shabbos, so Pesach, certainly Deichas Shabbos, Kavachem. The Talmid, if you don't not macro it, there's no Chiyav Korish, not macro Korban Pesach, there'll be a Chiyav Korish. Now, the first kasha is a very simple kasha, a very obvious kasha. I don't know how the Bnei Rasera were learning in their yeshiva, but if they were learning Al Seder Hashas, as they did in Voloshin, it was only later that things changed differently, but that was part of the Masera. Then they learned Shabbos before they learned Pesachim. And if they learned Shabbos before they learned Pesachim, then they should have known the Gemara Pesachim and Beis. Pesach sheshachtu b'midbar b'Shabbos shachtu. They say that the Pesach in Midbar was on Shabbos, and the Pasuk says they shechted in the Midbar. Sharei shom isa v'ahi b'chodesh harishon shana sheni zbechad al chodesh shuka v'mishkan tana oisa yom notol atzara toris rishon l'maisa bereshis etc. etc. What's the cheshbon? Sharei, how do we know that it was Shabbos? Rish Chodesh be'echad b'Shabbos hoya. B'chodesh Rish Chodesh be'echad b'Shabbos, that's the one that's Torah Torahs. Rish Chodesh isn't. Muchachu Shabbos yom shluis hachodesh kal b'Shabbos. Like this year, Sunday was Rish Chodesh, and their Pesach is going to be on Shabbos. You can't have it any other way. There's no Shona Muberes that puts in a few days between Rish Chodesh and their Pesach. So, and for Shitas Pesach, the Pasuk says, by Dabar Shomish, Sinai B'Shana Shin says, Mitzvah B'Chodesh Rishon Leimor. By Yas, Uvnei Yisrael Pesach B'Noyad, if that's not enough, it says, it says that they did its best operation by also Yom Chadish ben Rabbayim b'Midbar Sinai kechol asher tziv Hashem es Moshe kenos of Bnei Yisrael. That includes the Shechita Pesach. So in the Midbar they brought it Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos, and if they learned Shabbos before the Pesachim, they should have known that the Korban Pesach is Deichi Shabbos. What was the stuff in the first place? The answer to that kasha is a little bit. It comes in a different way. Is an Or Sameach. The Or Sameach is not the Or Sameach. The Or Sameach was published, or the article of the Or Sameach was published in a periodical. I think it was the Hamayon in Toshin Lamed Ches, I think. But it's a piece with the name of the Or Sameach on it. What does the Or Sameach say? He quotes Mechilta. A Mechilta in Parshas Bleich. V'shochat oisa kol kal adas Yisrael minayin at oimer shim'ein lam Yisrael pesach echad shekol miritzim b'yidei chivason Talmid leimar v'shochat oisa kol kahal adas Yisrael v'shochat oisa. There's discrepancy here. There's a singular and a plural. The shochatu is plural and oisa is one. You have everybody shechting a single Korban Pesach. It's impossible. So he's saying that Kol Yisrael is shechted with a single Korban Pesach. And if that's not enough, you have the Gemara in Kedushin and Beis. Talmid leimar v'shochto Yisrael kol kahal Yisrael bein Rabbayim. V'chi kol kahal kulam shechtim v'alein shechted el echad el kan mikol shekol Yisrael yitzim pechad echad. So how can all Yisrael be yitzim pechad echad? So Rashi on the spot says in Kedushin. Rashi says that he had held that Korban Pesach, that Achil is not making the Korban Pesach. Now again, the Or Sameach has a whole marochet in which he tries to prove the Mechilta held that Korban Pesach, the Achil's Korban Pesach is making. I'm not interested in the Rayis. Doesn't make a difference whether the Mechilta did or didn't. But he goes on to explain both Mechilta and the Gemara, not like Rashi. He says that there are two dinim in the Korban Pesach. There's a Korban Pesach that comes b'teres yochi. We know all about that. Everybody has to bring his Korban Pesach, and it is a Korban Pesach. But the Gemara says that the Korban Pesach, he comes b'knufia. It's different. It's an in-between intermediate stage. Not a Korban Yochid really, not a Korban Tzibur really. It's a Yochid and Tzibur together. So he says that you see that the Korban Pesach is two separate things. It's a Korban Yochid and it's a Korban Tzibur. So he says that there can be one without how do you get the Korban Tzibur according to Or Sameach? You have all the Yichidim together, you take them all together, and the whole is equal to some of its parts, and that becomes the Korban Tzibur. Every little Pesach together, I tell them all together, they're one big Korban Tzibur. Says the Or Sameach, but the Mechilta is telling you that you can have a Korban Pesach with a Korban Tzibur without a Korban Yochid. What if you don't have enough Korbanos for everybody to share? That doesn't mean that the Korban Tzibur is bottled. So Kol Yisrael can be Yitzeh with a single Pesach, and the single Pesach is there b'teiras Tzibur. It becomes a Korban Tzibur, and there's no Korban Yochid that year. And as far as the Korban Tzibur is concerned, there's no halacha that Chil is makiv. It's what's makiv is the Chil is the Korban Yochid. For the Korban Tzibur, it's not necessary.
So if somebody's derech v'chayka, they have to bring.
We'll see in a second about that. We'll see about Pesach Sheni in a minute. But the same thing that the Or Sameach wrote in this article is in the Zera Avram, a little bit different of Nachman Zem, but the same Yisod, that there is a Korban Yochid and a Korban Tzibur. That's in the Zera Avram as well. Now, on the basis of that, it's pretty easy to understand the suffix of the B'nai B'Seira. B'nai B'Seira knew very well that the Korban Pesach in the Midbar was Nishkat on Shabbos. They only didn't know whether it was B'Teres Korban Pesach of a Yochid, and everybody shechted their own Korban Pesach, or it was B'Teres Korban Tzibur. L'may nafkamina. The nafkamina is whether everybody could bring their own Korban Pesach, or they had the single Korban Pesach. If you go back to the Psukim, there's no pasuk that says they ate the Korban Pesach that year. The Sarah didn't know. Was it Nechal? It wasn't Nechal. What was it? It was a Korban Tzibur. It didn't have to be Nechal. By the same token, it was a Korban Tzibur, and Korban Tzibur was Deiche Shabbos, but the Korban Yochid wasn't Deiche Shabbos. And you used the Korban Tzibur with a single animal. I don't need everybody to bring an animal. If it's the Korban Pesach that's Deiche, then if it's the Pesach the Yochid that's Deiche, then obviously everybody can bring his own Korban, but there is Yochid, and it'll be Nechal also. So that's the first. And then comes the Oid Kal V'chomer. Now, the Oid Kal V'chomer, I don't want to belabor the point. There are lots of, what do you need 2 reasons for? If you have a Gzera Shova, then what do you need the Kal V'chomer for? So, as you look in Rashi, you look at others there, that Hillel was telling them, if you Gzera Shova is only Kabbalah with Messiah. If you don't have Messiah for the Gzera Shova, I'll give you another reason. For that, you don't have to have a Messiah, Kal V'chomer, or Ban Yatzma. And he's giving them a new one, a new Kal V'chomer altogether. So he's saying, even if you don't think Gzera Shova is a good Gzera Shova, what's the Gzera Shova? I left out the point. It's Mayadeh Mayadeh. What is the Mayadeh of the Korban Pesach? It's Pesach Sheni. And Pesach Sheni is certainly a Korban Yochid. It's not a Korban Tzibur. So they're bringing Gzera Shova from the Korban Yochid of Pesach to the Korban, to Pesach Sheni, from Pesach Sheni, and they're telling me that the Pesach Sheni is just like the Pesach, it's just like a Korban Tzibur, and it's also Deiche Pesach. And there's also a Tosefta, if I can find it quickly, a Tosefta in the Ein Psochim, it says that the Korban Pesach is Deiche Shabbos, not only the Korban Pesach, the ordinary one, but Pesach Sheni also, and not only Korban Tzibur, but Korban Yochid also. So it seems to be almost like it's the words of the Tosefta. The Tosefta is telling you that this is what Mayadeh is teaching you. Mayadeh is teaching you that's Deiche B'Teirus, Korban Yochid, and Korban Yochid is the matir of the Korban Pesach. So now obviously, in ordinary times, there's no separate Korban Pesach because the fact because Bob Knufia turns it into a Korban Tzibur. And we have all these individual Korbanos taken together, and putting them all together, you end up with a sum which is as great as the parts. Maybe not greater, but since all the parts together equal a Korban Tzibur, we've got a Korban Tzibur now also. That's one thing. But now let me go back to what is the purpose of the Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer adds something very significant to the understanding of everything that we're talking about. Let me first talk about different kinds of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs that are mitzvahs yochid. We know all about them. Most mitzvahs are mitzvahs of yochid. Every individual mitzvah is a mitzvah yochid. Then there are mitzvahs that are totally in the tzibur, that are the tzibur's mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that's not an individual mitzvah. Nobody has to be mekayim it, but the tzibur has to be mekayim it. The gimel mitzvahs in Stav, Mitzvos and Loretz, none of them were a chayvas yochid. Yochid was capable of being a man melech. No, Yochid was capable of building a Beis HaMikdash. No, Yochid was capable of Mechias Amalek, etc., etc. So that's a korban. That's a mitzvah of the tzibur. So you have mitzvahs, a mitzvah which is a mitzvah of the yochid, and then you have other mitzvahs which are mitzvahs of the tzibur. There are mitzvahs which are in between. There are mitzvahs of a yochid, but there are mitzvahs which are totally in the tzibur. To take the obvious example, deal with mitzvahs rabbanon, maybe Parshas Amalek. Maybe we need to Parshas Amalek without reading from a Kriyas HaTorah with a minyan, but certainly the Chiyuv Rabbanon is to read it from a klaf, from a Sefer Torah, a kosher Sefer Torah, and to read it b'tzibur. So that's a mitzvah totally in the yochid. People who didn't daven the whole year with a minyan went to Parshas Ocher because you had to be Yitzhak Parshas Ocher, and you can be Yitzhak Parshas Ocher, you daven with a minyan. So all from the yeshuvim, the dorfs, they used to come to the city to be able to hear Parshas Ocher. It was a chayvas yochid that was totally in the tzibur. In Mikra Megillah, Mikra Megillah, presumably the two din Mikra Megillah won't go into that in detail, but besides the Chedes Yochid, you have to Lechatchila here with Tzibur because of Presuming Nisa. Presuming Nisa is my definition of the Tzibur. So if there are two mitzvahs in Mikra Megillah, one's reading it and the second being far from the nest, if we're producing mitzvahs totally with Tzibur. So now we have to know, and there are other mitzvahs that can go into this analysis. I presume that Hakel is a mitzvah schal on the tzibur, not the yochid. I'm sorry. It's also one of those mitzvahs that you have to bring a Moshe V'Taf. What do you bring them for? It must be because I'm going to bring them, and you don't have Hakel without the whole tzibur together. So it seems to be I can't read Hakel at home, so I have to bring it to here. It's probably a chiv yochid, which is totally in tzibur. Now in Korbanos, there are also the same thing. In Korbanos, there are Korbanos that are clearly Korbanos Tzibur, and there are Korbanos that are clearly Korban Yochid. Achatas and Osham, those all the standard ones that Baal Achet. Anything that's Baal Achet is a Korban Yochid. The Korbanos of the Shemenes Yemim is clearly a Korban Tzibur. No Yochid was responsible for the Miluyim. The par helim dover shel tzibur sounds to me as if it's a Korban tzibur. The peasants bring it because they forgot a halacha. It means all Klal Yisrael forgot the halacha. The peasant Goel forgot it. Well, everybody was in the tzibur. They were teaching it to everybody. So who's mechuyev them alone? The whole tzibur was mechuyev. Whatever they were doing was on behalf of Klal Yisrael. When you the kaparas, and you the kapara on behalf of Klal Yisrael also. They were all nichshon, the hero of the peasant Goel. And then there are others which I don't really know. I think I mentioned this briefly on an earlier occasion. And I don't know what about the Talmidim and Musafim. I thought I can't bring a Talmid, but if the Tzibur brings a Talmid, is the pshat that it's the Tzibur that is bringing the Talmid, or is the Tzibur bringing it because it's a collection of Yechidim? And every yochid, and the meeting softly different from Korbanos because it came from Master Hashekel. What about you, Master Hashekel for? Where did the Maroon come from? Where did everything else come from? All the other Korbanos where you can be Makdish to give it the Hektish, let Hektish bring it. Why do you give a Hektish for it? Let somebody give whatever they need for all the Korbanos. The answer has to be because everyone has to have a chelik in the Talmidim Musafim. So what's pshat? They have to have a chelik in the Talmidim Musafim. It can be one of two ways. Either because I'm part of the tzibur, and the tzibur, this entity called the tzibur is bringing it, or it's because it's nothing more than a korban shel shutfim, and the shutfim we call the tzibur. I can't get 10 people together and say we'll bring our own little Talmid. I need all of Klal Yisrael to bring it. So everybody has to be Master Shekel, and we bring it for everybody together. But it's basically no more than a korban of shutfim, which is like a korban yochid, but it's a korban yochid which is totally in the tzibur. And I think I already said that if you look at Rashi in Parshas Korach, and Pesach says Al Teifen Lohem Al Minchosa, the Yisrael spell that they shouldn't. Rabbi Shalom shouldn't be makabel the ketores of Korach. That was pshat, the first pshat of Rashi. Al teifin lehevel minchosam. What's the minchosam? The minchosam means the ketores. It's their gift. Here it's not the technically the korban mincha. It's the ketores. Don't take their ketores because it's not one of the korbanos. It's bever. It's an iser. Or says Rashi, the second pshat. The second pshat is molodis. The second pshat says al teifin minchosam in all of the korbanos tzibur. Don't burn up on the Mizbeach, the chelik that belongs to them, as if you could, you can distinguish their little chelik from the chelik of every other Jew. And he's telling them that they, if they're shutfim, it's chalukas hashutfim, or to put it in the reverse, if you see you can make a chalukas, then it must be chalukas hashutfim. The tzibur can't be machalik. The tzibur is a tzibur, and it's more than the sum of the parts. The tzibur is a new entity, whatever it is. We'll talk maybe a little bit more in a few minutes. But the tzibur is a tzibur, and you can't divide a tzibur into parts. if you're dealing with a korban of shutvim, and if the korbanos are nothing more than the korban of shutvim, then you can say yesh breira, or you can make the breira. He's doing it. He's making it. He's saying, this is the chelik of kerach, and this I'm not taking from you. Or at least that was what Moshe Rabbeinu was responsible for. Now, if that's true, then we can go back and redefine the statement of Hillel. And one is Uzer Shaveh, and number two, there's a Kal V'chaymer. What does Hillel say? Hillel is telling them, you want to know where to bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Of course, you bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Mayadai. I'm bringing you Uzer Shaveh from Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is clearly a Korban Yochid. So you'll tell me that I can bring my own little Korban Pesach, just like I brought the Korban Pesach. It's no raya at all. What is Doichet? When I now look at the Korban Pesach, why is Korban Pesach Dechei Shabbos? Is Korban Pesach Dechei Shabbos because it's a hefts of Korban Tzibur? Or is it the Shabbos because it's Kavua Lezman? We know this. We have the principle. Korban Tzibur is Dechei Shabbos, Korban Yochid isn't. But why is a Korban Tzibur different from Korban Yochid? A Korban Tzibur is Kavua Lezman. So what does that mean? Is that the urzach? Is that the cause in and of itself? Or is that only a kind of a siman? Whatever is Kavua Lezman is a similar siman. Whatever is Kavua Lezman is the Korban is the Shabbos. So he's telling me, I'll bring you a raya. My raya is the Gzera Shavah. If the Talmid Musafim are deiche, then the Korban Pesach is also deiche. What's a Korban Tzibur? It's Kavua Lezman. What's Korban Pesach? It's Kavua Lezman. You'll turn around, Hillel knows very well. That who told you that the Korban Tzibur is deiche because it's Kavua Lezman? It may be it's deiche for a different reason altogether, because it's the Korban of the hefts of Tzibur. Who told you that the Korban Tzibur is a Korban of all the Yechidim together? And the reasons it's because Kavua Lezman, and it doesn't have to be Korban Tzibur for that. I'll tell you that it's different. A Korban Tzibur is Doiche B'Teres Korban Tzibur, and therefore, if it's going to be Korban, it could be Doiche, it'll only be one Pesach, but there's Korban Tzibur. Hefza Tzibur. How do I know that a Korban of Shutvim, the Korban Pesach, which is a Korban of Shutvim, how do I know that it's Doiche? Kal v'chaymer, it's going to do with Tzibur Yochid, it's going to do Kavua Lezman, not Kavua Lezman. Suddenly it's all totally in the Chiv Koros. I need that only if you tell me that a Korban Tzibur is not a Korban of Shutvim. If it's a Korban that belongs to Tzibur in its entirety, then it needs a new limud. It needs a limud from the Kal v'chaymer, and that was the Sof of the and Hillel had to come to be patient for them. They were mesupik. What's the halacha? They were mesupik Rashi. Rashi tells me that a Korban Tzibur being one of two things. They didn't know. Is it a Korban of Shutvim that's only bought at Tzibur, or is it a Korban of a Heftzah Shel Tzibur? And Hillel, in effect, is telling them it doesn't make any difference. That either way, I have a limit for you. The first way is a Mayadai, and the second way is going to come from a Kal v'chaymer. So that's the basic point. So the first part is from Siyas Halakhic. That leads us to something else. The something else is also totally in the definition and the notion of Itzibur. It sounds as if it's coming from left field. That has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, but it has a lot to do with what we're talking about. You are all familiar with the Machlekes, the Bahalokas, Kedolos, and the Rambam, with regard to how you count the Aseres HaDibros. Balhag says a Nichashim Lekecha is not one of the Aseres HaDibros, and the Rambam says it is part of Aseres HaDibros. And the Gaboyim were Machriya, like by Rambam, because before reading Aseres HaDibros, B'Sivur, they give a Pash on the Bima, and they give the Pash before Nichashim Lekecha. So they're announcing that this is part of the Aseres HaDibros. Balhag says it's not part of the Aseres HaDibros. And again, not that it's important for us altogether, but there are certain people out there who paskin like the Bahag. They have 10 commandments. Their 10 commandments doesn't begin with Halakhic Hashem Elokecha. They divide the second into two separate ones, as does the Bahag and the Smag, who came much later. But that's not our point. What is a curiosity is that there is a famous or an infamous copy or a kind of a reproduction of the Aseret HaDibros, which is hanging in a certain courtroom. I think it's in Tennessee. And it was a subject of a tumult, separation of church and state. How can you have, this is obviously religious, how can it be adorning a secular courtroom? But they were smarter than people who were objecting. They wanted to be interdenominational. So they made it 11 commandments instead of 10. Literally, if you look at the pictures of it, it goes from 1 to 11. They want to be Yitzhak, Bahag, and the Rambam, or Jews and Christians. Forget about that. Whatever the constitutional objections are that there's any kind of religion, let alone whether it favors one religion over another. That's not the point. But it's the machlokes reflects itself. The real point is, and why didn't the Rambam count it among? Why didn't the Bahag count it among the mitzvahs and the Rambam? Yes. The point is fairly obvious, but a little complicated. There is a Ramban in the Sefer HaMitzvahs who explains why the Rambam includes it, and more or less why the Bahag doesn't include it. He says, logically, that it can't be a mitzvah. It's not. How can you have a mitzvah without a mitzvah? If you don't have a mitzvah, then where does the mitzvah come from altogether? And on the other hand, how do you know that there is a mitzvah unless you're mechuyev to accept the mitzvahs? It's where do you start? It's all men are liars. All Christians are liars. I'm a Christian, therefore I'm a liar. Forget about how Bernard Russell tried to weasel out of this, but it doesn't make sense. It's illogical.
Tautology.
It's not just a tautology. You can't tell them. I want them. Tautology means that Scott is the author of whatever it was. They're synonymous. I made the subject the predicate, the subject is the predicate. Here you're starting a premise, and by the time you're finished, the first premise is false. The third premise, the conclusion, disproves the first premise. I'm saying all men are liars. All Cretans are liars. I'm a Cretan, therefore I'm a liar. If I'm a Cretan, then it's not true that all Cretans are liars. I lie when I say that. Everything means all Cretans are liars means they always lie and never tell the truth. So if they never tell the truth, then all Cretans are liars. So Moshe, what's going on here? And if you want to know, you can ask the question a little bit differently. What's pshat in the mitzvah? How in the mitzvah in Hashem Elokecha? How can you command belief? If you believe it, you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, commandments aren't going to make you believe it. The Rambam had no problem with that, and even though he had no problem, he included it in the mitzvahs. The Rambam had no problem with it because the Rambam itself validated. And Har Sinai, Bnei Yisrael were Nevi'im, and they knew Anoich Hashem Elokecha not because Moshe Rabbeinu told it to them. They heard it themselves. How did they hear it? Nevuah. I don't have to believe that it's day outside and not night. It's not belief, it's knowledge. My senses tell me that now it's day. I don't have to believe you when you walk in the door and tell it to me. And if you're telling me something and I'm not ready to accept it from you, you'll tell me, don't believe me, just go and look. That's what the Rambam would have said. You want to know why I have to be Mekayim mitzvahs? I have to be Mekayim mitzvahs because you were at Har Sinai, or at least your ancestors were at Har Sinai, and they saw the Rebbeinu Shalom. Don't ask me that we can't have mitzvahs without a mitzvah, and I don't know there's a mitzvah. Of course you know there's a mitzvah. You were there, your ancestors were there, and they told you about it. There were, it's eight and PA from one generation to another generation. And Afal PK, he puts it in the mitzvahs. And again, I'm not trying to criticize his cheshbon. The cheshbonis are not terribly important. I want to talk about that. I think I talked about it once. How you catalog the mitzvahs in non-African halacha. Virtually no nafkas halacha, and certainly none that is necessary. Again, I don't want to repeat things, but because of Sefer Krisus, if you divorce your wife and not unless she's an Isha Roa, you're not going to get scar for it. And it's still the Minyan Mitzvahs. And Minyan Mitzvahs is not limited to a woman who you're mechuyev l'garsha. So again, the Chofetz Chaim said that the word mitzvah doesn't mean good deed. It's not in the sense that you're doing things to get brownie points of one kind or another. The word mitzvah literally means it's a subject of itzivui. And his loshen, as they repeated to me, was they're not taryag mitzvahs, they're taryag inyonim. What he meant was taryag inyonim that are regulated. They're things that aren't regulated, do whatever you want. What you eat Friday night for the Suda is not regulated by halacha. It's not even yontif for the chiv of simcha. Whatever it is, kov v'aynik, but be my guest. Whatever you think is kov v'aynik for Shabbos. But there are other things which are subject to dogmatic revelation, which we call a mitzvah. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good deed, like a mitzvah in Yiddish. A mitzvah in Yiddish is not the same thing as a mitzvah in Lashon Kodesh. In Lashon Kodesh, it means it's the subject of tzivur. In Yiddish, it means it's a good deed and you get scar for it. Those two are not the same. The same word, different languages, has different meanings. So now the question is that whether it's Anoich Hashem Lakecha is part of the Taryag mitzvahs or not part of the Taryag mitzvahs doesn't make a particle of difference. A Yid is mechuyev to believe Anoich Hashem Lakecha, whether it's part of the Taryag or not part of the Taryag. But Kan Haben Shoyel, it's not part of the Taryag. So you tell me, I don't know how I do it, but if I don't believe Tarei Chas v'Sholem, go find out how to believe. But if it's not a mitzvah, so what's going on here? Why should I have to go do it? It's not even regulated, it's nothing. Why do I have to go look for it? So why am I going to believe altogether? And remember again that if there's no mitzvah of Amunah in the Rebbeinu Shloim, then there can't be mitzvahs altogether. Everything's totally in that. So they're basically in Rishonim, there are two ways. The first way is Reb Sadia, who thinks, they call it a priori. I would call it natural law, but Sadia says it very clearly. He says that a person knows instinctively that there is a Rebbeinu Shloim. He knows it. You don't have to teach it to him. So what? So it's a Rebbeinu Shloim. And now, how do I know that he gave it to her in the first place? I wasn't there. How do I know that I have to believe everything that's there? To which he answers, or why do I have to follow what's there? Of course he gave it. He gave it, so what? What makes me mechuyev to fulfill whatever he says? And I'm my analogy, but he says that if somebody created you, if you're going to figure out the Rebbeinu Shloim is the creator, we'll skip that step in a minute. We'll skip that step for the moment. If I know that there's a creator, then I owe makar satayv. My dimion, my moshel is like children to parents. Psychologically, children want to keep their parents happy. Don't talk to me about rebellious child. It happens, but basically, naturally, just look at little kids. Kids do what the parents want them to do, but until they get a bunch, then they rebel. Then they have their own roots. But basically, the roots of the child starts out as being the roots of the parents. And why is it the roots of the parents? Because they know whose side the bread is buttered. That's they're taking care of them. He realizes that he's been taken care of. When he gets hungry, where does he go? When the baby wants to breastfeed, where does he go? He understands all of this. Therefore, he understands that there has to be a kind of akara sotay. That's a priori. That's natural law. And says the subsadia. That's why you have to accept mitzvahs. If once you figured out that the Rebbeinu Shloim exists, you knew that, and then you know that there was mitzvah, so you have a chiyuv to accept everything that he was mitzvah. That's the standard analysis in medieval Jewish philosophy. There's a second mahalach which is more obscure. I know it only from a Tshuvas Rivosh. The Tshuvas Rivosh is Shin Tzadik Tes, but it's not the Tshuvas Rivosh. The Rivosh is quoting a Ramban in the Sefer HaMekach. I wouldn't know that there was a Sefer HaMekach till I saw the Rivosh. But the Sefer HaMekach was reprinted a couple of years ago. It's there. You can go look at the Sefer HaMekach. The Ramban says that the chiyuv to be mekayim mitzvahs comes from the koyach hatzibur. The tzibur has the koyach to force people to do what it wants. And why? It's Mishpah HaMekach, not the, I don't remember, I think it's Mishpah HaMekach. No, or maybe it's probably Mishpah HaChera. Yeah. Sorry. Mishpah HaChera, we knew it that before. This is probably Mishpah HaChera. In any event, he says that this is the Koyach HaTzibur. The tzibur has the koyach to do virtually whatever it wants. And why does the tzibur have the koyach to do whatever it wants? And he talks about all things, lots of things like Hanukkah, Mikra, Megillah, where would it come from? It's the Rabbanon gave them the power. Don't confuse me. But he says it was the koyach tzibur. The tzibur gave them the power to make Hanukkah, to make Purim, to make all kinds of things. And where do they get this from? No, if Hobbes knew how to read Hebrew, I would have said that he plagiarized Leviathan from the Ramban, because it's exactly what he says in the Leviathan. People emerged from the jungle, and what did they do? They made a tzibur. And what's a tzibur? The tzibur has all kinds of rights that Yechidim don't have. Why does the tzibur have such rights? Because they ceded their authority to the tzibur. And they gave the tzibur to do all kinds of terrible things. So I entered into a contract with the tzibur. I gave the tzibur to do all kinds of things. Now I have to obey it. Who says I have to obey a contract? Man must honor contracts made. The third one of his natural laws. He says that's a priori. If you made a promise, not every promise maybe, but you made a pact, you made a treaty, you made this kind of social contract, this social compact that arose as a result of whatever happened when they came out of the jungle. This gave the tzibur the power over every one of its members. And what about the Nelodim, or people who come to some particular tzibur from way out yonder? You come, you accepted, when you became an American citizen, you pledged allegiance. You said you're going to abide by the laws of the tzibur. When you're born, you were born into it. You don't like it, why don't you leave? So Ramban says that's why Jews have to be Mekayim the mitzvah. They entered into a contract with the Rebbeinu Shalom. They accepted the Torah, and now they have to keep it because it's a koyach hatzibur. How did they enter in the first place? They entered into it because they were not a yochid. The yochid can't do these things. A tzibur did all of this. And once they entered into the tzibur, the tzibur becomes mechuyev. So kan haben shoyel before Pesach and the Ben Rosh. I'm asking why. I know Hobbes says if I don't like it, leave the society. Why can't I go to Outer Mongolia? I can't leave the tzibur here. Why can't I go to Outer Mongolia? I know there are no Jews in Outer Mongolia. How do I know there are no Jews in Outer Mongolia? Because every year Chabad has an annual dinner, and they have shluchim from the whole world, and everybody gets up and says where I'm from. Nobody got up and said I'm from Outer Mongolia. So I know I can go to Outer Mongolia. If there are Jews in Outer Mongolia, they're usually not there. I know I can go to Outer Mongolia and there's no other Jews. And what tzibur is going to be clear for me? I left the tzibur. No, the whole reason is you can't leave the tzibur. You're part of the tzibur. I want to leave. The Ramban, I don't want to misrepresent. The Ramban says it's chal and nelodim also. I want to know why it's chal and nelodim. And the Ramban doesn't explain. He says it's chal and nelodim. So this is, whatever I have to offer. If I need to contribute to this, is why it's chal and the tzibur. I know what's chal and the tzibur. You know what's chal and the tzibur? Because a tzibur is not a conglomerate of individuals. A tzibur is a corporation, and a corporation is an entity bifnei atzmai, and this came into its existence at Har Sinai. And tzibur loimes, corporations don't die, corporations continue. Tzibur is a tzibur, and I can't take myself out of the tzibur. It's impossible. Once you became part of the tzibur, I can't remove myself. How do I know that? Because Bleich said so. Bleich says once you enter this, you can't leave. You can leave any community you like, but you can't. Is nevertheless Israel. You can't declare yourself a non-Jew. Now, going down to Mongolia isn't going to help you. So, what does this mean? This means that I'm explaining the Ramban on the side that there is such a thing as a tzibur. I know there's a tzibur only it from one pshat in Rashi and Chumash and Parshas Kairach, and one definition of the limud of Hillel with regard to Korban Pesach, that there is such a thing as a tzibur. What do I need a tzibur for? For Korban tzibur. It's not a conglomerate of Korban Ashutrim, it's a new entity. And that's the same thing that keeps me from going to Outer Mongolia and saying that the Halakhic Rabbeinu Tam don't apply in Outer Mongolia. They only apply, that's a whole part of the Halakhic. I can go wherever I want. And you can't run after me. All the takonis and the xeris and the chromim are only chal on that tzibur. They can't go beyond that tzibur. I'm part of the tzibur of Klal Yisrael, and whatever was given to Klal Yisrael, I can't renounce because I'm part of that tzibur. That comes almost by definition. So once we reach that, we have a definition of a tzibur, but there's one thing that's kind of steer to me. The steer to, it's the ultimate right. We have a Maimer Chazal that tells us that if you may have power and Vosmer of the Kodesh, Mam the Shir Sachalum Veloshin, often the Torah and they refused it. But if often the Torah and they refused it, he's offering the same thing he offered Jews at Sinai. He wants to make everything that's binding for future Torahs. So they'll turn around and say, we're not a tzibur. You can't bind us for future Torahs. The answer is that it's Haba Talia. When did Klal Yisrael become a tzibur? When they accepted the Torah. And Chas v'Shalom, if some Ulvaloshin would have accepted it before us, when the eventually was busy running around peddling it, they would have been the Am Segulo. He would have declared them the tzibur, and they'd be the only corporation that exists. And Jews would be like anybody else. But the Kabbalah Satira and the creation of a tzibur called Klal Yisrael, that's Gita Yodei Venkechad. The two sides of the same coin. Ben Shlem created the tzibur when he created the Torah. When he gave the Torah, he mandated that it be accepted by something that he called the tzibur. A corporation is a creature of statute. Everybody knows that. A tzibur is the creation of statute. Who made the statute? The Bleich made the statute. We can't make a statute for a very simple reason. We can't make a tzibur, a corporation, for a very simple reason. We can't create metaphysical entities. Try making a malach. It's only the Rebbeinu Shalom who can create metaphysical entities as part of the deal. Man has a physical universe, and he can create physical entities. The Rebbeinu Shalom has a metaphysical universe, and he can create metaphysical universes. He is the only one who can create a tzibur. And now, Am Nivra, the Halakhic, he created this. It's my own Russia. He created this, the Halakhic. Now you accept the Torah. That's the Hilula of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's the Hallel. I made you, I made the tzibur, I made the Torah, and I put them all together. And you can't resign. You can't go looking someplace else because you can't dissolve a corporation. You can't dissolve a corporation. He didn't give you the right to do it. He made it. He can dissolve. He can dissolve whatever corporations he wants. But you don't have the power to dissolve the corporation because the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't give you the power to dissolve that corporation. I think that's pshat. The Ramban doesn't explain it, and I think that it's really on the kun of the Ramban. He doesn't explain why it's binding on succeeding generations and why I can't just remove myself. If you're talking about something which is only the Koyach HaTzibur, as a Koyach HaTzibur, I should be able to remove myself from the tzibur. I'm not bound by the tzibur, just like I'm not bound by other things that come only from the tzibur. Now, having said all of that, let me go back just a little bit. I'll make a chsimet me'en the psicha. We're already over time. A couple of weeks ago, when Rabbi Willig said something, I proceeded to talk about, maybe he mentioned Rochon, I don't remember, it was a bias. Achim before the Chalukah, what are they? So I think Rabbi Willig talked about I'm sorry, Rabbi Elchanan called it a new entity. It was a bias, and we were, like nomenclature to use. Why is that? And I insisted it's because the Torah created it. I can't create it. Sure it is, but only Rebbeinu Shalom can create what I call the corporation, a tzibur, and Tfusas Habayis. Rebbeinu Shalom can create Tfusas Habayis. I can't create Tfusas Habayis. I can't create anything similar to Tfusas Habayis. That was Shitose. I only changed the nomenclature that probably would have used. I don't think Rabbi Chanan is right. Yeah, I am Rabbi Chanan, it's the same thing. But I have a simpler explanation than Rabbi Chanan. I know why there is Tfusas Habayis. There's in the Machlekes Rishonim with regard to Yisuri Hanoi, whether there's Bailus on Yisuri Hanoi, is there Nisur Gersel on Yisuri Hanoi. What's this all about? If you go to a law school, again, that's why it's the end of and if you could take a class in property, it's more likely than not that the first day the professor is going to walk into class and give a patch on the dish, and bang on the stender, and he's going to say that property is a bundle of rights. What he means by bundle of rights, I'm not really interested in, but he will emphasize that you have different kinds of rights. He'll explain one right, the other right, the third right, and he will tell you that's all there is. And you can divide property into different rights, and therefore, what follows from this, you can separate the rights, and you can transfer some rights without other rights, riparian rights, the right to the water, without right to anything else, servitudes, whatever you want. But it's absolutely incorrect in Halakhic. That's why Halakha has a different perspective on the whole business. It's wrong, at least according to the Rishonim mold, that there is a Nisur Gesel and Yisuri Hanoi, because there's Bailus and Yisuri Hanoi. What rights do you have to Yisuri Hanoi? You have zero rights to Yisuri Hanoi. There's nothing you can do with it. You can't have any enough from it. And don't talk about Shleik Derech Hanoi. Shleik Derech Hanoi could also be the rights. But if you're not allowed to have Hanoi, what does it mean to say it's mine? I'm talking about, well, again, I don't like these words. Kant would have called it a ding an sich. Locke would have called it a substratum. It's something, we call it the Chemer Yuli. There's something which doesn't have any attributes. It's matter, pure matter, nothing more than matter. You can't describe it any other way except the Chemer Yuli, whatever. Halakhic substance, they translate into English. Which got no adjectives. There's no way to describe it. It's just thing by itself. Property is a thing by itself, a ding an sich, literally. And everything else comes afterwards. And that's why Yisrael and Organ have Bailing. I have Bailus on the Chemer Yuli. Eventually had Bailus on the Chemer Yuli too, even though it didn't have the attributes. So he created the Chemer Yuli. That's why it was his. So there can be such a thing as a Chemer Yuli. The only thing that can the only thing that can have a non-physical existence, the only thing that has a non-physical existence is a metaphysical entity. I can't create a metaphysical entity. Metaphysical entities, you can create legal fictions if you like. You can legislate a corporation, but that doesn't make it real. It's a myth. But there's some person who can legislate myths, and not myths anymore. The Bleich legislated Klal Yisrael. He created, for lack of another term, I'll coin one, corporate Israel. The only corporation that exists. The Tzibur, which is called Klal Yisrael, and the others didn't want it. Other Muslim could have had it, then we wouldn't have had it. But now it's corporate Israel, not corporate Yishmael or whatever it might be. And the Rebbeinu Shalom decided that he was going to create another corporation. It's called Tfusas Habayis. Tfusas Habayis is metaphysical. What is it? It's the thing without any rights. I don't have it. If Rachim Shecholku are not Shutzvim, then what was in between? Can I go steal from them? Of course I can't steal from them. What do they have there? They have no rights. They can't, sure, they can demand Chalukah. All Shutzvim can demand Chalukah. And if there's Ein Breira, then it can't be Mafreya. So what would be what they have Mafreya? Why can't they go steal before they divide it? But after they divide it, I can't steal Mafreya. But if I manage to get the Chaparan before they divide it, why can't they do it? The answer is they own something called Tfusas Habayis, which is not strictly metaphysical. Eventually created it because otherwise I wouldn't be masig it. It's the ding an sich. It's the property without attributes. So of course there is property which is more than a bundle of rights. The bundle no rights to chukas hashutzvim until the mechalek. One goes into before the chukas hashutzvim is one from the other. All it is this underlying entity which we call what the Rebbeinu Shalom created. That's called property. That's called what I own. I can own the property because Rebbeinu Shalom told me I can own it. He created it. He can create metaphysical things. He can create physical things too. I'm not quite sure what the substratum is I'm talking about. I suspect it's metaphysical. Whatever is Semitic, the Rebbeinu Shalom created it. I don't care whether you call it physical the way some people want to call it, or you call it a measurable entity. There is no such thing as any such idea as the product of human convention. The Rebbeinu Shalom is only one who can create the Sibur. He did it once in eternity. He made Klal Yisrael. Other things we can talk about afterwards, but that's all there is, and that's how we can understand Korban Pesach. And it turns out to be the case, unfortunately, as I began, that we come with a different kind of perspective, and the perspective has been influenced to a huge degree by what we pick up in the streets, what we picked up in kindergarten. But we're taught all of this, and you have to overcome it. You know, we're all Bali Tshuva. I said before at the beginning that I'm a third generation American. My great-grandchildren are different. They don't have the same intellectual genius that my generation had. My generation grew up differently. And before we learned anything, we learned all the things that we had to speedily forget. All of the prejudices, intellectual prejudices that were ingrained in us, we got from, not from Missouri, we got it from elsewhere, and you had to make an effort to overcome it. Lahavdil, no comparison, but like the Tiferes Yisrael with this little story about Moshe Rabbeinu. And again, can't talk anymore about Sinai Rabbim. Some people succeed better, some people succeed less, and some don't even try. Some of them remain that way till May of Esrim Jonah, because they're left with, it's a kind of quasi-Avodah Zarah, we call it, intellectual kind of Avodah Zarah. A Weltanschauung with a set of principles, and the even ethical and moral norms have nothing to do with Judaism. Usually, there's no such thing as the Judeo-Christian morality. It's a misnomer. But to the point where people think there is, and they've sold it to people out there. And that's because never we have this original sin called Americanism. We're born into it, and we have to overcome it. That's come.
Next week, I think we'll see Xavura on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Hopefully back.
We'll see.
Whoa.
We'll see.
Look at that.